if we understand the principles of cycles and what we can see with the naked eye from right here in our own backyard on planet Earth, then suddenly there are some of these cycles that become very obvious. But the key, George, is that some of the cycles are so long in duration that one civilization forgets them until the next, except for those who have recorded what it meant to them to try to warn future generations. And this is where I believe we are right now. We're at the close of a great cycle. We're seeing the world change like it always does as we go through these cycles. And the key is that some of the great civilizations in the past have collapsed at precisely the moment where we find ourselves right now, because they chose to compete and fight against one another rather than work together to get through the cycle. And
what does it tell you, Greg, though, that these cycles exist in the universe, that they have this pattern to it? What does that mean? To me, it sounds like it was designed that way.
Well, this is we could have a whole conversation on the intelligence that appears to be underlying the cycles. What we know is we live in a world of cycles within cycles. Some of them we're familiar with, the 24-hour night and day, the cycles of our bodies when we're hungry, and all of those things. Some of the cycles are so huge that we don't remember them from generation to generation. But the fact that the cycles are interrelated has led to two great discoveries in the 20th century. I'm going to lay the foundation for this, and I know that when we come back from our breaks, we can talk about these. The first cycle and the first discovery that modern scientists now have documented, and I'm going to give some references on the air for listeners that want to look into this a little deeper. First of all, we know that Earth and our solar system orbit around the Milky Way galaxy, around a great energy source at the center of our Milky Way. And right now, scientists believe it takes about 250 million years or so for us to make that journey. So that's a cycle nobody today is going to remember the last time it happened.
Not at all.
But within that cycle, while we're making that big orbit, we're doing some other things along the way. There's what is called a wobble and a tilt that Earth goes through that takes about 26,000 years. It's called the precession of the equinoxes, where we go through all of the zodiacs, the zodiac signs. That's a 26,000-year cycle. And within that cycle can be broken into 5 smaller cycles, each about 5,000 years long. And the cycle we're ending now is the last of one 5,000-year cycle, which also happens to coincide with the 5th of that series within that 26,000-year cycle. So it's a convergence of these rare cycles. And the reason this is important, listeners, they hear this and they say, these are such big cycles, why do we care? The reason is our own scientists now have confirmed that there is an energy source at the center of our Milky Way, and where we are in relation to that energy source has a profound effect on planet Earth and on everything from the magnetic fields of the Earth to the climate, to the weather patterns, to the sea levels, to the ice caps.
To the way people act.
Well, this is the key, George, and this is it. If we can go back into the geologic record, which we'll do tonight, in the ice cores of Antarctica, the seafloor sediments, if we know where to look in the past for these cycles and when they occurred last, what we also find is that humans are changed in the presence of the cycles. We must change to accommodate what these cycles bring to us. And then we look into the archaeological record at very precise dates, and you will be absolutely amazed at the parallels between the collapse of some of the great civilizations in the past during their time in the cycle and what we're living right now, and the economic collapse is part of that.
Because they did not change.
They didn't change. They chose to compete and fight with one another in the presence of the changes, George, and this is the whole key. The changes appear to be very intense, and we are certainly living these intense changes now, but they appear to be relatively brief. They don't last for generation after generation. So if we can recognize that we're living a really intense but very brief period of time, and we learn from the mistakes of our past and we work together, I think we've got a really bright future on the horizon. Or if we go the way of some of the civilizations in the past, the world changed. They fought to try to maintain an unsustainable way of life, and they lost everything. and we're only beginning to find out about them, in the 20th century through the archaeological record. So
Greg,
are we making those mistakes again? That's the question we've got to ask.
If you're in the ocean on a rough sea, you can either fight these waves and go right into it, and you'll probably get flipped over, or you can ride out the waves and go in the patterns of the waves. Is that much like these cycles, these fractal time patterns, where if you're going to survive it, you're going to have to learn how to comfortably ride those waves?
I think it is, George, and I think it behooves us, if we understand our relationship to the cycles, if we understand that things don't stay the same, that they change, and that we have a good idea of when we can expect those conditions to change. Not the exact things that happen every time, but if we know that the weather is going to change, and we know the magnetic fields are going to become weaker, and we know we're going to have more energy from the sun, and it's going to heat up our atmosphere. If we know those things, and we know that we can work together for this generation or two to survive those periods of time, then I think we're better people for that. And my sense is, George, that if we work together now, because we need to survive these changes, then even when we no longer need to, I think we're going to find, as a planet, we're better off by cooperating rather than competing with one another, and it may be the way we choose to live our lives. But before we get to that point, we're going to go through all the cycles tonight and talk about how we know where to look in the cycles and what we can realistically expect for 2012 and beyond, because 2012 is not the end of the world. It's the end of a world age, and the end of anything, by definition, is the beginning of what comes next, and that is the beauty of our time.
The winter solstice, December 21st, 2012, is that the key date, that date?
That date marks, as John Major Jenkins has beautifully illustrated in his book, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, that date illustrates an alignment, a particular point in an alignment, but an astronomical alignment between our solar system, Earth, our sun, and this energy source, this core of the Milky Way galaxy. But when we think about this, George, we're talking about huge systems of galaxies and solar systems and planets, and these things don't happen overnight. They don't happen. They don't turn on a dime. So what we're really talking about is a zone of time that's being marked by these alignments. And we entered this zone, according to some mathematical calculations, we entered the zone right around 1980. And we will leave the zone around 2016. And 2012 happens to mark an alignment that gives us a straight shot, unimpeded access to this energy source that is radiating from the core of our Milky Way galaxy to our sun and our solar system and our planet. And what the scientists now are telling us is that they're actually looking in the fossil record, and they can tell in the fossil record when we have had this alignment before, because life on Earth changes whether we're close or far away from this source of energy. It has a pronounced effect on life on Earth. And, intuitively it just makes sense. If there's a big energy source out there, if we're tilted one direction and we're further away, we're going to experience it less. If we're tilted toward it and physically closer to it, it's going to have a stronger effect. And it's this cyclic tilting in the motion relative to this energy source that seems to be one of the great drivers that changes what's happening in our world right now.
Greg, have scientists recognized the patterns as they affect us? Not with Earth changes, because those are easy for them to find, but have they recognized the fact that these patterns also have a profound effect on us as people?
Well, George, this is where you're a step ahead of the scientists, because it is only recently that scientists have even given any credence to the fact that our relationship in the heavens with this source of energy could have any effect on Earth whatsoever. Scientists have discounted that. They've pretty much blown it off for 40, 50 years.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, Greg, when we come back, and also we'll get into these various cycles as well. Fascinating. Fractal Time, the secret of 2012 in a new world age. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment with Gregg Braden on Coast to Coast AM. Have you signed up yet for the free Coast Zone e-newsletter? All you have to do is go to coasttocoastam.com and click the link there. and you'll be able to sign up for the Coast Zone newsletter. When you do that, by the way, you'll